We talked about the strides in comparison to previous year, and this time we're gonna take a look at the Cray Elementals.
Stand up! Vanguard!
Hey Cardfighters, welcome back to another video where we discuss everything concerning the Premium Collection 2020 set, and we already discussed about all the strides in very much detail. We looked at them in a semi-vacuum, where how good they are on their own and how good they could work with the rest of the clan, but we also looked at them in comparison to the previous stride that they got the last year when we got Premium Collection 2019. If you're interested in any of those videos and you haven't seen them before, links on top and also in the description for extra watching hours. And there's some interesting information in those particular videos that anybody could use if they want to dabble in the premium side of Vanguard. But today we're gonna tackle the other side of this set, as we didn't only get strides for every single clan. Bufoo also announced that we're gonna get more Cray Elementals, and we can utilize these Cray Elementals in their own separate deck. Spoiler alert! These Cray Elementals, or at least some of them, will have some ramification for premium on the whole landscape of the meta, but we dabble in that in a future video because that deserves its own separate video. Today we're only gonna look at all the Cray Elementals themselves, and not only that, we're gonna rank them all in order to see which were the best and which were the worst Cray Elementals, and you probably can already guess which couple of Cray Elementals will sit on the top. But to give an insight of what this new archetype was that Bufoo had announced, it is basically the new Storm Elemental Cycloned deck. This is the new stride for the Cray Elementals that basically allows you to empower all vanilla cards, so cards with no skill whatsoever. You buff them up, but not only that, you can stride into this new stride and it allows you to potentially restand all those units, so you can put out even more pressure. And the crazy part is you can start flipping your G zones in the early game so you can pressure your opponent right from turn 1. And that is basically the essence of the new Cray Elemental vanilla beatdown deck that I wanted to build with these new Cray Elementals. Now, with that introduction out of the way, let's jump right into these new cards and see which are the best of the best. And we're going to start off with number 9, which is Earth Elemental Lorock. And Lorock is basically the worst of all these Cray Elementals because its skill is very, very minimalistic and very conditional, because it's a grade 1 7k, so it's not of the best stats, and its skill is Auto and Guardian Circle. When placed, if your Vanguard is only grade 2 or less, one of your units cannot be hit until the end of the battle. So if we just look at the stacks of itself, it's basically an original grade 1, because in the before standard or before the reboot, grade 1s with skills were 7k, but it does have 10k shield, so it has the V era shield value, so it's a little bit better than G era grade 1s, but still worse than V era grade 1s. But its skill is basically an extra perfect guard where you don't have to discard. But the problem is you only have 2 turns of effectiveness of this card, because you have on turn 1 you are probably grade 1 when you can utilize it, and your second turn when you're grade 2 you can utilize it. And it doesn't matter if you go first or second, your opponent will also always have 2 attacks into you before you go to your grade 3 turn. And it's a very limited use because you need to have this in your opening hand or very early on, otherwise it's basically a dead card. I don't believe that it's a good card, and it's probably the weakest Cray Elemental out of the whole bunch because its window of opportunity is really small, and besides that, you cannot actually abuse this in any type of scenario, or any build can actually utilize it. So that's why it's taking number 9 spot here. Then for the number 8 spot, we have another grade 1, which is Air Elemental Bufoo. And once again, it's a 7k grade 1 with 10k shield. So it has the same pluses and negative points if you compare it to V era and G era grade 1s. But this skill is very interesting because its skill is Continuous Vanguard Circle. During your opponent's turn, if 3 or more new cards were put into your damage zone this turn, you may bind this unit instead of reveal the top card of your deck into your trigger zone for your damage check. So this is somewhat similar to the previous grade 1, the Earth Elemental, as it could be a perfect guard, but instead of that you need to play it from hand, this can be on the field, and it can be utilized even in the late game. The only problem with this particular condition is that you need to get 3 or more new cards in your damage zone. So you need to be hit 3 times to be able to use this skill. But what makes this card interesting is that it also negates multi-damage. So if somebody attacks with 4 4 critical attack, you take a 1 damage, you take a 2nd damage, you take a 3rd damage, and the 4th damage is then negated with this effect, which is pretty interesting. So it gives more applications to it. And Angel Feathers could potentially abuse this effect, as they can give themselves multiple damage during your opponent's turn, so they can force this grade 1 off on a more consistent basis. So because this has a more widespread application, and there is some way to abuse this, either Angel Feathers, and maybe some other clans could maybe utilize this, makes it a little bit better than the Earth Elemental, so that's why this will take the 8th spot. But it isn't by a landslide, because these 2 cards are pretty much in the bottom of the barrel, because their condition is really awkward. Then we get to the number 7 spot. And the number 7 spot is once again to a grade 1, as we have Heat Elemental Huang. And once again, a 10k shield, 7k grade 1. But its skill is actually useful because it can counterplay a certain counterplay within Premium. As its skills continues a Record Circle, all Vanguards must attack the Vanguard as much as possible. So when this card was revealed, I made the mistake that saying, well, your opponent can at least not attack to deny you, but they minus you in their card advantage because they lose the drive checks. But actually, that's not what's happening here. This card forces your opponent to attack, so they have no choices in the matter. If they can attack, so they don't have something like a restraint or anything, they will attack. So they will give you a counterblast, which is actually pretty good, because if your deck relies on counterblast, then this can be an essential piece for your consistency, as it forces your opponent to attack you if their main strategy is just to not attack. And because it's a grade 1, you have more times to slam this on board, especially in the early game if you open with it, so you can force off those attacks, which is actually pretty nice. And once you want to maybe give your opponent the option to not attack, maybe you don't like it, you can just call over it and get rid of this skill, because it also is an effect during your turn. So if you don't want to do that, you can just call over it and you're basically done. So that's why I want to give this the number 7 spot, as it is definitely more useful than the pseudo perfect guards of the other grade ones, but it's nowhere near in the same ballpark as all the other cards, because now we're going to start getting in some insane cards, because the number 6 spot and above are pretty good. As for the number 6 spot, we have Cloud Elemental Mowark. And this grade 2 is basically a superior right engine together with the grade 3 that can be slotted in any deck as long as they run enough vanilla cards. And triggers also count, which is actually pretty good. And that means you can experiment with other types of abilities or archetypes that might profit of a superior right engine, as this can then go into strides early on, and maybe even stride on your opponent's turn if you get more counterblast, because we're going to go over there in a second with the other cards, as this is a pretty good engine. And this grade 2 is basically a cornerstone of this whole package. The only thing about this grade 2 that it's lower on the rest is because if you want to play this grade 2, you also are forced to play the grade 3. But the grade 3 doesn't require the grade 2, so you could play the grade 3 in other strategies without being forced to run the grade 2. This is not the case the other way around. So that's why I find this card less effective or less good than the other cards that are a bit more flexible in use. But definitely, this is a really solid card, especially for the whole Cray Elemental vanilla archetype. This is a pivotal key card that allows you to be very aggressive out of the get-go. Because if you aren't aware, let me explain the skill so you have a better understanding why this card is pretty good in the whole build. Because its skill is act on Vanguard and Record Circle once per turn if you have 4 or more units with no continuous act and auto abilities, so vanillas. Cast counter+1, search your deck for up to 1 Thunder Elemental Barigiran, write at the stand, and shuffle your deck. If you wrote, you may turn a Storm Elemental Cycloned from your G-Zone face up. So this is what I mean with, it's dependent on the grade 3, that's the Barigiran. You write it, you have the superior right engine, and next turn you can immediately strike. And if you did this while going first, your opponent is still at grade 1. So if you strike, they're at grade 2, which gives you a huge edge here. But also because you flip open a Cycloned, that means all your vanillas, and you already have 4 on the field, get an additional power. Because if we go over Cycloned, you will see that it will give passive power, which makes your columns a lot more threatening and a lot more dangerous. So this is why this is a pretty good card, but because it's dependent on the grade 3, you need to play the grade 3, and you also need to play an excessive amount of vanillas, makes the card a bit more restricted in build options than any of the other cards that we're going to talk about in the second tier. So that's why this is only for the number 6 spot. Then for the number 5 spot, we immediately go to the grade 3, which is Thunder Elemental Barigiran. And its abilities are Auto and Vanguard Circle. When placed, cost Soul Blast 1, look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck, reveal the 2 unit cards without continuous act and auto abilities from among them, put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. So this card gives you potentially a 3+2. So unlike the grade 2 that relies on a lot of cards, this card can enable that, but it's a little bit too late because it's unplaced. But then again, if you go from the grade 2 into this grade 3, you also pluses off of it, which is actually pretty nice. But then you have its second ability, which is Act on Vanguard Circle. If you have 4 or more rearguards without continuous act and auto abilities, cost Counter +1, stride a Storm Elemental Cycloned on your Vanguard Circle from face up in your G zone. So you need a Cyclone face up to be able to use the skill to superior stride. If we combine this with the grade 2, you can, with 2 Counter Blasts, go from the grade 2 into the grade 3 into the stride. And while you do that, you can Soul Blast 1 also to plus while you go active, and then you can go nuts. Which is actually pretty insane, because you can do this when it's your turn too, because you start your turn from grade 1, you ride into the grade 2, you immediately go into grade 3, you immediately go into the stride. Which is insane, because you can do this while your opponent is still at grade 1. Yeah, pretty good. So this is definitely deserved as a number 5 spot, because there's also one more interesting thing that this card allows you to do. You can play this separately without the grade 2 in any build, and then get some insane value off. Because, interesting enough, for some combinations, you can combine this within the Narukami deck and then with the Narukami Stride. Because the Narukami Stride, for example, strides, it flips something, it does its thing, and strides out into the grade 3. So it goes back into the grade 3. You can flip open a Storm Elemental Cycloned, and then you can utilize this grade 3's ability, because it's a main phase ability, and the same as the Narukami Stride is a main phase ability. You can then counter this one and immediately stride back into the Cyclone that you just put face up. And if you play a pure vanilla build, you can then destroy your opponent's field, rip some cards out of their hand, potentially disrupt their drop zone, and then you start your turn by empowering your side columns, potentially have some restands, and just go wham. And you can do that basically for free. Which is pretty insane if you think about it. But not only that, because this grade 3 is a Cray Elemental, and this is the craziest part, if you combine this with the Gize starter, you can run all the Zero Dragons in any type of deck, and you can then stride any Zero Dragon in any type of deck. As long as you play Gize, the starter, and this is your grade 3 as a Vanguard unit. Because this belongs to any nation, meaning you can stride any Zero Dragon. So you can go Zoa in a Dragon Empire clan. You can go Ultima in a Dark Zone clan. Yeah, pretty crazy if you think about it. Then for the number 4 spot, we go super vanilla, because this spot belongs to Light Elemental Mekira. And this is a 15k shield, 8k grade 1. So on all terms, it's much better in raw value than the other grade 1s that we already seen before. And you might ask yourself, why is this grade 1 higher on the list than the grade 2 and the grade 3 that we just talked about, which is pretty insane? Well, the reason for that is very simple. The grade 2 and the grade 3 need to be played in a very heavy vanilla deck, otherwise they're not consistent enough, because you need to have a full board with vanillas. So there are some severe limitations in making those cards work, unless you use the grade 3 mainly for some ultimate stride shenanigans, but that's beside the point. This grade 1 is basically the new vanilla grade 1 that we've seen in the V era, but even better, because those 15k shield grade 1s are 7k bodies. This is an 8k body, which is actually pretty huge, because that makes Magic columns with any other card, like 10k grade 2s, which is pretty good. And also some other clans didn't have access to the 15k shield grade 1. This is a Cray Elemental, makes it open for every other clan. And with the whole Cray Elemental vanilla deck, this is probably one of the strongest Cray Elementals in the list. So it's probably gonna be run in almost all of those builds. It improves on a vanilla card, which is already existent and some decks already utilize. And therefore makes it a much more playable option and a playable card than a grade 2 and a grade 3 in my opinion. So that's why I ranked this higher as on the number 4 spot. But every card that we talked about pales in comparison to the top 3 cards, because now we actually get to the creme de la creme. The first 3 cards were pretty mediocre. The middle 3 cards were pretty good and playable, but the top 3 are insane. As for the number 3 spot, we have the new order card, Tempest Sphere. And this has the following ability. Cost, counter +1, and turn a card from your G-Zone face up. Look at the 7 cards from the top of your deck. Reveal up to 2 unit cards without continuous act and auto abilities from among them, put them into your hand and shuffle your deck. So this order card supports the Cray Elemental deck, especially for the grade 2 and the grade 3, as it searches out and it plots you on the Cray Elementals. Sadly, it doesn't cost counterblast, so it conflicts with the grade 2 and the grade 3 if you want to do the whole right chain from grade 1 immediately up to grade 3, because there's no way that you have enough counterblast unless you have some Bobos in your hand, then that's possible. But the main takeaway from this card is the fact that the cost is counter +1 and turn a card from your G-Zone face up. Probably most of the clans and most of the decks will be okay if the cost was counter +1 and the effect was turn a card from G-Zone face up. That makes this card already insane. But the fact that the cost is turn a G-Zone face up, that's no cost. Because this allows you to have GB on turn 1. Or on turn 2 if you get the damage, depending on when you get the damage. But at least as super early in an early game. Which allows you to play with all your GB skills and all those shenanigans and all those interactions. Which can be insane. But not only that, it allows you to open up GB free strides. Or multi-GB strides that get more power the more cards are flipped face up. Very early on. Also, this allows you in the Cray Elemental specific deck to flip open the Cycloned to get even more power in the early game. Which is pretty nuts when you think about it. This card can be utilized to an insane degree in just the Cray Elemental deck. But that in itself pales in comparison what type of impact this card could have for all the other decks out there that could then accelerate the GB count before they even stride. As that just opens up the Pandora box for infinite possibilities. Because also something that happens is you get access to your GB flip G-guards before you even G-guard it or stride. Which is also pretty good as it increases your defensive capabilities. Now what tops that grade 1 order card that already can be utilized in any deck? Well, the only thing that can top that is basically a stride that empowers all of the plays that we just talked about and adds some. Because the number 2 spot belongs, in my opinion, to Storm Elemental Cycloned, the new Cray Elemental stride that makes the new Cray Elemental vanilla deck. As its skills continues on Vanguard Circle and G-Zone, during your turn, if this card is face up, all of your units with continuous act and auto abilities gets power plus 5k. This ability stacks for each copy face up. And this is what I mean, that if you utilize the grade 2 that flips this copy face up, you empower your vanilla cards, so you already have a full field. So that's pretty good. It also synergizes with this Tempest Sphere that flips a unit face up, so you can flip this one. So you can accelerate your power on your units and be very aggressive in the early game, because it gives 5k power to a unit, which is 10k power to a column. 10k power to a column on turn 1 or turn 2 is insane. When you go into grade 3 turns, then it's already pretty good value, but not something that you're like, oh no. But on a grade 1 and grade 2 turn, when your hand size is pretty small, that type of increase in power is on the same level as getting plus 50k when you go strides. So that's something you need to keep in mind. This is insane value. But it also has a second ability, which is just a cherry on top, as Auto and Vanguard Circle, when you drive check, reveals a normal unit with no continuous act and auto abilities, so no triggers. During the battle, this unit attacked, stand one of your rear guards. So you now also get free multi-attack. This is basically an Ashura Kaiser, but then better. And because all those units get an X amount of power increase, they probably can still hit your opponent. So you can possibly swing in with multi-attacks. And you can utilize this in a Force clan, a Protect clan, an Axel clan. So there are all kinds of insane possibilities. You have Force 1 markers to increase the power. Force 2 markers for extra criticals. You can have Axel markers, so you have even more multi-attack that hit like trucks and all that kinds of crazy stuff. So that's why, in my opinion, this is the second to best card in the Cray Elemental lineup for this set. Because this is basically what makes the whole Cray Elemental deck work and has some nice interactions with other cards within the premium collection, like I explained with the Narukami stride that can then interact with the grade 3 and then immediately go into this this stride. But where the number 3 and number 2 spot overshines everything that came before it, the number 1 spot overshines everything that came before it. And not only in this video, basically everything that we've talked about this set on the channel. You know what? Scrap that. It overshines everything that we discussed on this channel for the past 2 years. This card is just a pinnacle of insane cards. Because the number 1 card from the Cray Elementals, and probably also the number 1 card from this set, goes to this grade 1 Rain Elemental, Zazan. Because Zazan's ability is Auto Vanguard and Rigor Circle. When placed, cast Soul Blast 1 and call up to 2 unit cards with no continuous act and auto abilities from hand to the Rigor Circle. So you call 2 vanilla cards from your hand. Can also be triggers. If you call 2, turn up to 1 face down Storm Elemental Cycloned from your G-Zone face up and draw 2 cards. Alright, for anybody that's familiar with Yu-Gi-Oh! Or that is playing Yu-Gi-Oh! And for some reason is watching this video, maybe you're also a Vanguard player, but for anybody that's playing Yu-Gi-Oh! Pot of Greed got banned in your game. Now, think about a Pot of Greed card that also special summoned 2 units to the field. Yeah, that's this card. So if that doesn't sound broken, basically it is. This card allows you to not only flood the board, it pluses you 2 cards, and it also flips you a Storm Elemental Cycloned. And the Storm Elemental Cycloned gives those vanilla units that you just called an additional 5k power. And because this card costs a Soul Blast, you can do this literally on turn 1. Unlike the Tempest Sphere that is probably on turn 2 because you need to get damage, if you get damage at all. So Zazan is definitely a turn 1 engine. If you went second and you write this thing or even call this thing, you go off. And that makes this card insane. It works in the Cray Elemental deck, and it works in every other vanilla deck that comes out, or pseudo vanilla / FTK deck. And we've seen countless videos on the internet the past few weeks where somebody broke this card with X clan or X combo, and it's just insane what this card can do. And there's a reason why Sullen Vanguard started the hashtag Zazan to 0 movement. But then again, I do not understand why Sullen Vanguard wants this card in Cardfight Vanguard 0. I know that it's probably not the game that he wants to, but it doesn't give him right to break the game. So yeah, with all that said, this card is definitely deserving of the number 1 spot for the Cray Elementals within this set. And that also wraps up this list for the Cray Elementals within the Premium Collection 2020. We couldn't do this last year because there was no Cray Elementals, or at least none that I remember. And maybe we're gonna do this next year as well if they decided to do a version 2 of this. I hope not, or at least when they do, that they actually do a R&D on these cards, because they made a big oopsie here. But now I want to know what your opinion is in the comments down below, so let me know what you guys think of this ranking. Do you agree with this ranking? And maybe you are more leaned on a certain other card, so let me know your thoughts and opinions of all these new Cray Elementals in the comments down below. And not only Zazan, because I know you guys are wondering where's my hashtag Zazan to 0 video, as this card definitely deserved its own separate video, and it will come to the channel, as I will talk about and sit down and discuss this card in full detail, what is happening with this card, what is wrong, what is good, and the whole thing around the hashtag Zazan to 0 movement, because we need to discuss about all that. But that is a story for another day. As always, this video has been brought to you by our lovely patrons over at patreon.com/VanguardInsider. You guys are amazing. If you do want to support the channel or everything that's happening on the channel, you can simply do that by subscribing and hitting the bell button to be updated for a future video, as well as putting a like on this video. But if you want to support us a little bit more directly, then check out our Patreon at patreon.com/VanguardInsider and become a Patreon today. But that said, I'm Mr. Time Thief, and I see you guys in the next one.